Hey folks, today we are going to dive into a disturbing topic that is rarely discussed and mostly left out of the history books. Human zoos. Most of you probably had no idea such a thing existed, and you can't be blamed for it. It is certainly easier to forget than to remember and to face the shame of this abhorrent practice. A wise man once said that democracies are measured not by how they treat the majority, but by the way they treat minorities. It is, therefore, not a surprise that human zoos are seen as a topic to be avoided. We simply cannot bear what this implies for our civilization. So today, you're going to learn everything you need to know about this shameful practice. Without further ado, let's dig in. One of the first people to host a human exhibition was a man called P.T. Barnum. Back on August the 11th, 1835 in New York City, he displayed a woman named Joyce Heth. He presented her as the 161-year-old woman and claimed she was the former slave of Augustine Washington, George Washington's father. She was said to have raised and taken care of the future president, George Washington. None of these claims were true, but regardless, the exhibition was a huge success and attracted the attention of thousands of people. The late 18th and early 19th century was the time of great discoveries. New communities were founded, and explorers came back home telling wild stories of their impressions. Despite labeling the people they saw as primitive and savage, these stories aroused great interest in the general population, and it soon became clear that many were willing to pay money to see these unfortunate people. Thus, thousands of people from Asia and Africa were put on ships and brought to Europe and the United States to be displayed in human zoos. Some of the people to be displayed were enslaved, while others were deceived with false promises to board the ships. Needless to say, these promises were under-delivered or were a complete scam. Once they came to the New World, what awaited them was a recreation of their natural environment in which they were made to display their customs and way of life. The poor living and weather conditions made many of them sick and weak. If one of them died, the body was buried in the zoo's garden without the proper ceremony being observed. Sounds horrible? You haven't yet heard even half of it. Man's avarice knew no limit. Human zoos made plenty of money, and that's all the hosts cared about. While some exhibitions had permanent venues, others toured through major cities like Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, New York, Chicago, Antwerp, and Barcelona. The visitors treated these ill-fated people no better than the hosts. Many of them insulted the adults and fed them inside the enclosures as if they were animals. Despite the trauma and suffering of these brave people, human zoos were a major hit of the late 19th century. The 1889 Paris World's Fair featured 400 indigenous people and an entire African village. The count of the visitors went as high up as 28 million people. Interestingly enough, the practice of human zoos influenced even political events. An exhibition of Philippines in 1886 in Spain caused the 1896 Philippine Revolution. The general sentiment was that such an abhorrent practice could not be tolerated any longer. One of the most popular displays was the Igorot village. People of this tribe were deemed to be the least civilized, and it was a major success, becoming one of the most popular attractions. Their people were displayed half naked in minimal clothing and could often be seen eating dog. The visitors were fascinated by the eating of dog meat and cared very little that this was a misrepresentation. The Igorot did eat dog, but only as part of a ceremony that rarely occurred. Regardless, they were made to eat dog meat every day during the 7 months of the exhibition. Other practices that were put on display were the crowning of a new chief, a private occasion for the tribe, which was displayed publicly to the visitors. But let's talk some more about the lasting effects of this mistreatment of the people at the human zoo. The trauma and humiliation were so great that often upon release, some of these people committed suicide. One such case was the Congolese man named Ota Benga. He was put on display in New York's Bronx Zoo in 1906. Ota was deceived that he would be taking care of the elephants in the zoo and had no idea that he himself would be displayed. When the case was reported in the newspapers, this caused outrage in the black community. Ota was placed in a cage with apes and was called the missing link, obviously stating that he was closer to apes than humans. More than 40,000 people came to see him and mock him. And the audience came in droves, often 500 people at a time, even thousands a day, at the zenith of the exhibit. But there was growing concern about this kind of display. Alarms were sounded at the Colored Baptist Ministers' Conference, and a number of prominent pastors were outspoken about what they viewed as monstrous disrespect. Reverend James H. Gordon, superintendent of the Howard Colored Orphan Asylum in Brooklyn, was one of the most vocal opponents of the exhibit. "Our race, we think, is depressed enough without exhibiting one of us with the apes," he wrote. "We think we are worthy of being considered human beings with souls." The exhibition was closed, and a few years later, Ota was freed. But this story has no happy ending. Ota was unable to adapt to life in the US and committed suicide on March 20th, 1916. Such was the fate of many of the exhibited. The practice of human zoos raises many civil and humanitarian questions about racial supremacy, racism, greed, and ignorance. As our civilization keeps advancing technically, we cannot help but feel that we are lagging spiritually. For example, the last human exhibition was at the World's Fair in 1958 in Brussels, Belgium. You're wondering why that's important? Because only 11 years later, a man landed on the moon. This is a perfect example of the discrepancy between technical and spiritual progress. Though there are echoes of these human zoos around the globe, such shows are widely condemned. Yet, as these pavilions and villages lay in ruins, or only existing in faded posters, there are those who argue these shameful episodes from our history should not be simply effaced or forgotten, but should stand as a testament to a shameful and often uncomfortable past. Don't forget to comment and share below in order to educate more people. If you like our Day in the Life of series, make sure to subscribe to our channel and visit regularly for more videos soon to come. Till next time.